different kinds of environments, from very secular. As you heard, I've written for many of the secular magazines. Yes, not your congregational newspaper, the Marie Claire. Didn't stay there for too long. But I did actually write for Christian Living Today for many years, and absolutely loved that experience of just having the freedom, I think, to be who I was in the media space. And I wrote a women's column called Woman Today, and just, having come from the secular magazines where they were always telling me, you can't mention God and you can't mention, heaven forbid you mention Jesus and anything. And then moving into the world of Christian media, where I just felt I had such freedom to really say what I wanted to and influence the way that I wanted to. But I think the great thing about today is having sort of this commonness about us. We're all people in media, and we're all Christians, and that's a great privilege to be in a space like this where we can just freely share with one another our own experiences and our own learning in this space. And when I thought of what we have in common, I thought really what we do all have in common as media people, whether you are behind the microphone or a writer, a journalist, a screenwriter, no matter what you're in, you're a storyteller. And I think probably one of the things I'm most passionate about is storytelling. And I think that I'm probably in good company here, because everything that we do in the world of media is story. We know that story sells. And we know that good stories sell. So I'm passionate about stories. I think they're the currency of human contact. They're the way we connect. And they inspire us. They're the way we make sense of life. In fact, stories actually take up 65% of our brain. And I know when I do eventually get home tonight, in time for supper, my kids will just plummet me with stories. And it's the way they're going to connect with me. My 7-year-old's going to come and she's going to tell me a whole story because one of the girls in her class has had her ears pierced. And every day now I'm hearing about the pierced ears and the story about this. But this is the way Josh is going to come home after his day and he's going to tell me a story. It's the way we connect. I love what Robert McKee said, and I don't know if any of you have read his work on story and the power of story. He says, stories are the creative conversation of life itself into a more powerful, clearer, more meaningful experience. They are the currency of human contact. Again, they're the way we connect. And it's beautiful. I feel privileged to come and share a bit of my own story with you and sort of already feel kind of connected. And as media people, we use story. Some of you from CCFM, one of their most successful initiatives is the Stories of Hope. You've all probably heard it in the morning. And it's just ordinary people with ordinary yet extraordinary stories. And it's been such an amazingly powerful morning show, that just Stories of Hope. It's lovely to see Graham Chanel here and meet Val for the first time from Focus on the Family. What do you use? Stories. It's stories. Focus on the Family is people's stories. It's most fundamental, where they're testimonies, and that's what speaks, that's what inspires, that's what makes us want to turn on the radio. I listen as often as I can, just lap up those stories. Heartlines, Garth Jafford, what he's done is amazing, and we had a few hours together the other day, and we were like eating out of each other's brains on story. And their new initiative called What's Your Story is really just using storytelling and the power of story to work towards nation building, to work towards building reconciliation and building bridges. This simple yet incredibly profound thing that we have called story. And of course, even Mnet featured 2 seasons of a thing that they called My Story. In fact, Gary went onto it, and they did it so well. They took South African celebrities and they really just said, we want to tell you more of the story of these South African celebrities. So you get to see them in their, on the sports field, whatever these celebrities are doing. But that program said, we want to tell you more about their stories. And it really delved deeper into the human stories of many of our South African celebrities. And it was a fascinating few seasons that they did of that. But the interesting thing is when you study story, it's all very well for us saying, oh, it's something that gives us goosebumps and makes us feel good. But scientists have actually proven the brain activity of a storyteller and a listener actually align. And they call this neurocoupling. Okay? So neurocoupling is when the person telling the story, actually the brains can connect with the listener. And this means that the storyteller can have an incredible impact on the listener. If I tell you about, in fact, many people have come to me already and said, how's your dad? And my dad was sick of late, but he happened to be in Cape Town, and he was in the Kingsbury Hospital, and he was feeling quite sorry for himself. It wasn't a serious thing. He sort of had an infection on the elbow that they needed to attend to, but it sort of dragged on, and he ended up being in hospital for about a week. But on one of the days, I went to Snooki's Takeaway, because I knew all Dad wanted was prawns. I mean, of all the things. Anyway, so I took him this thing of greasy chips and beautiful grilled prawns, and he just absolutely lapped up these prawns, made the hugest mess, but it was this happy moment and beautiful to see my dad, who'd been so discouraged, eating at these prawns. And for those of you who love buttery, garlicky prawns, as I say that, maybe your mouth starts to water. I was thinking of ribs, but there are too many vegans around. I mean, ribs really make my mouth water, but vegetarians not. But if I then start to relate perhaps kind of a very scary and pleasant story to you, you'll actually find your body starts to stiffen. And your muscles, your neck might start to feel a little bit sore. So during storytelling, actually a hormone called oxytocin is released in our brains. And they say that this is the hormone that helps create trust and connects us as social and emotional beings. So herein lies this really scientific power of why in media and all over the world, as long as we've ever lived, have used have used the channel of story. And stories actually, more than just connecting us, they actually have the power to change us. And when we tests again have revealed that when you hear a story, there's a little part in your brain called the insula. And this part in your brain actually lights up when you hear a story. And this is the part in our brain that helps us make sense of life. They call it the wellspring of social emotions. So emotions like empathy and pride and lust and disgust, all those things sit in the insula. So you see, again, this powerful thing happening. Neuroscientist Paul Zak said, stories can change our behavior. When our brains encounter a good story, oxytocin is released, causing us to feel empathy. The empathy is what causes us to want to take action. So stories can mobilize people into action. And this is such a powerful, powerful tool of media. And stories have the power, actually, to alter the moral compass of someone hearing them or witnessing. A good story can tell you what is worth living for, what is worth dying for. And is this not what we want from our own stories? Jonathan Harris says that no matter what you do in your life, what you create or what career you have, your greatest creation is always going to be your life story. And I think that this is really where I want to take us a little bit today, that, you know, we as people in media spend so much time focusing on the stories of other people. That's what we do. That's what we're paid to do. great stories. When I worked for those magazines like Oprah and Marie Claire, they just wanted sensational stories of other people. And I used to go around looking for these incredible stories that would inspire. And that's what we do. But so often we realize that in the process, we're actually neglecting the power of our own life story. And is this not what we want our own story to do? If stories are such a powerful thing, they can change the moral compass of other people, do we not want our own life stories to have this sort of effect on other people, that they feel moved by them? The theme for your next few days is transformational leadership. And the leadership guru in our household is not me, it's my husband. So Gary, who is a coach, and I think his sort of leadership grew its fame when he led the Indian team to their World Cup victory. And when you lead when you know what cricket is like in India, and you lead their team to victory, literally when we land in India, they still roll out the red carpet for Gary, and he does leadership talks all over the world. So it's something he's really delved into and learnt a lot about and speaks a lot about. So when I knew I was coming to this, I said to him, what does transformational leadership mean to you? And he didn't even hesitate. I said, I don't want a whole spiel. I said, just give me, what does it mean to you? And he said, simple. It's about leading by example. It's about inspiring others. That's what he said. And as I thought about it, I thought, as people witness our stories, if they're good stories, we get to inspire them. We get to point them towards a better way of doing something, a better way of thinking about something. That I think, is transformational leadership. But it has to be a good story. It has to be a good story. And so that's where I want to take us just in the next half an hour or so. But what is this going to look like? What is a good story going to look like? And as I started thinking about South Africa and good stories, of course, this one specific story came to mind, and it happens to be about our most transformational leader that we've ever had and has probably ever lived. And I just want to remind you about a good story, what it looks like, what it feels like.
I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
Today, President Mandela takes office in Pretoria, balancing black aspirations with white fears.
Remember this day, boys. This is a day our country went to the dogs.
Brothers, sisters, this is the time to build our nation. All of the whites are cheering for South Africa. All of the blacks are cheering for England. How long before the World Cup?
Don't get your hopes up. We're a damn disgrace.
I've been invited to tea.
With who?
The president.
Tell me, Francois, how do we inspire ourselves to greatness when nothing less will do? How do we inspire everyone around us?
What did he want?
I think he wants us to win the World Cup.
This rugby is a political calculation.
It is a human calculation.
According to the experts, we'll reach the quarterfinals and no further.
According to the experts, you and I should still be in jail.
Times change. We need to change as well. We become more than just a rugby team.
Did you ever imagine this?
How could I?
Do you hear? Listen to your country. This is it. This is our destiny.
I was thinking about how you spent 30 years in a tiny cell and come out ready to forgive the people who put you there.
I am the master of my fate. soul.
I try to think what that feeling is when we watch a good story or we witness a good story, or that moment when you close the last page of a really great book. And I think the feeling that we get when the credits roll is gratitude. I think we have a deep sense of gratitude that we've witnessed something beautiful, something inspirational. And I think more than this, I think we feel grateful that we've been moved and we've been shifted in some way in our own thoughts and behavior. And a good story does that. It's not just about a great leader, but it's also a good story. And that story, as I'm going to illustrate, has all the makings of what we classically call a good story. And many of you, this won't be new news because you're in the world of media and storytelling. But when I started to study this, I realized that there's a very definite and very simple formula to a good story. And quite simply, that is, the definition of a good story is a character who wants something and overcomes hardship or conflict to get it. And when I discovered this, I kind of felt a bit disappointed, because I guess I thought every great story had been written in sort of some mountaintop, amazing, inspirational moment. But then you realize when you think of all the great stories you've witnessed, they take on this formula. And you just think of Invictus, which we just saw the trailer of. You have a character, a very definite character, who wants something. The character has to want something good and noble. He wants unity of a nation. But there's always a but in a good story. He has to overcome a whole lot of conflict to get it. And as you look at all of these, even The Notebook, come on ladies, we love that movie. Gary can't stand it. He's never stayed awake through it, but I love it. But you have a character who wants something, she wants love, but there's a big conflict. She has to overcome a hardship to get to that. And so the story unfolds, and we get drawn into it, and we learn from it. But where I really want to take you today is that I believe that the same characteristics that go into writing or producing a really good story go into living a good story. So I'm kind of asking you, but you're all intelligent media people, to think a little bit in metaphors today, that those same characteristics, a character who wants something but has to overcome conflict to get it. Think about it. To write a good story with our lives, we have to do much of the same thing. And leadership is about inspiring. And what we're saying is that good stories inspire. Good stories inspire. So those are the three elements that we're going to briefly look at. A character who wants something but has to overcome conflict. So the very first thing is this idea of a character. And you all say, well, of course I'm the main character of my story. But the interesting thing is that, again, as media people, we often aren't. Our life is spent thinking all the time about other people's stories. As moms, our life is spent thinking about the stories of our children. You know, many people are caught up in all these series on Netflix, and their lives get consumed by the dramas and other people's stories. So we're actually sometimes forget that we need to be the main character, that we need to be focusing on creating a story for ourselves. I think that this was something actually that I didn't realize I struggled with, but I did struggle with it. And I met Gary when he was still playing for South Africa. He played 10 years of international cricket for the Proteas. And then he went on to coach India for 3 years, and then went on to coach South Africa. So when we met, I entered this huge world of cricket. Cricket. It was in the heyday of the John T. Rhodes, Alan Donald, Hansie Cronje. The world, South Africa, was just obsessed with cricket during those years. And everywhere we went, everyone wanted Gary's autograph, Gary's photograph. I can take photograph with any cell phone known to mankind, because I'm always the one taking the picture. And the conversation was, this is Gary Kirsten's wife, and people would just ignore me. They would just want to speak to him about cricket, of all things, cricket. cricket. And when I and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. When I wrote my autobiography, I actually wrote this in the author's note at the beginning. I said, in meeting, dating, and then marrying a well-known international sportsman, I'd entered a much larger story. And with it came the growing insecurity that my story was just too small, maybe too boring. Sharing your life with someone whose story everyone wants to hear everywhere you go and all the time, it's not surprising that I started to believe that my own story was not good enough or big enough. In many ways, it felt easy at this point to simply put my pen down, stop writing, and just live his story. So I suppose in many ways I lost confidence about my own story, and this was unusual because I'd grown up as a very confident young girl. And maybe some of you are saying, well, you know what, it's just easier to spend my life obsessing about all the stories, amazing stories that I get to tell about other people. And let me just push mine to the side. And I think I sort of found myself confronting this when publishers approached me and they said it was, I had been given a talk somewhere, and they came to me afterwards. I think I shared the platform with Gary, I think that one, and they came to me afterwards and we'd love to publish your autobiography. And at the time I was working as a freelance journalist, and of course, that's every journalist's dream to get your own book published. So I jumped at the opportunity. But I think inside, I knew this had nothing to do with me. I knew this had everything to do with Gary. And they were just intrigued to know, what is it like to be married to an international sportsman? And what is it like behind the scenes? And, what was it like during the whole Hansie Cronje saga and the whole tragedy of that? And all these stories that they wanted me to reveal. But anyway, I went home and I suppose I hit a bit of a crisis about my own story, because I thought, what about my story would be good enough or interesting enough for someone to pick it up and take it to bed with them, or for someone to pick it up and take it into the toilet with them. That happens in our house a lot. But as a journalist, we know how to get people through 250, not 250, we know how to get them through, 500 words, 1,000 words. But to get them through 250 pages, I thought, I don't know if my story's good enough. It's not good enough. And anyway, so I went home and I started writing, and I thought, I'm going to give them what they want. And so I started writing from when I met Gary, and I started to tell the story of that. And as I wrote, nothing about the process was working. As writers, it just wasn't gelling. It was just a grind. And eventually I closed my laptop and I literally just got on my knees and I said, Lord, you've given me this amazing opportunity to influence so many people and so many women specifically. And I know I've got a lot to say, but why is it not working? And gradually, after about 2 months, and when you have deadlines and publishers breathing down my neck, 2 months was a long time, but it started to come to me, and it was just a sense of the Lord saying to me, I have given you a story. I have given you a story, and I want you to own it. I want you to find value in it. I want you to use your story to influence people around you. I love that Terry Pratchett quote, if you don't turn your life into a story, you just become part of someone else's. And that's not what our Creator planned for us. He planned for each one of us to find value in our own story. And anyway, I then went back to my laptop and I started to write. And I started to write right from the beginning of growing up in this little village in Hilton, in the home of Michael and Carol Cassidy, and the amazing privilege of that, of watching my father, the secret struggle fighting against apartheid, and the only child in my school who had ever been into a township and had people of all color in our home, and the things that I was exposed to, and the ups and the downs, and I thought, this is a good story. I've got a good story. And it was an amazing realization of finding value and realizing that I am the main character of my story. And that's what God has given me to influence others. And that sort of took me all over the show. As the book came out, we launched in India. Gary was incredibly supportive. So while I might not have been carried on the shoulders like my husband, he'll kill me if he knows I put that picture there. But I found my own sphere of influence. And it was the most exciting thing to realize that this world was going to open up to me. But I had to take hold of it. And I had to say, you know what, I've got a story and I'm going to put value on it and I'm going to use it wherever I am. I'm just an ordinary person. I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it in my home with my domestic worker. I'm going to use it with my children's friends, with their teachers. And it's been such an incredible journey and continues to be a journey, but also continues to be a journey of trying to reaffirm myself, remind myself, to have the confidence in that. So that is the first thing, of being the character. Okay, every good story needs a character. The second thing every good story needs is the character has to want something. And again, this probably sounds like, okay, well, I kind of know what I want. But good stories, the character has to want something good and noble. We can't just, no one goes to watch a movie about someone trying to buy a big house in southern suburbs. No one wants to read a story about something insignificant. It has to be something good, something noble. Think of the movies, Braveheart, he wants justice. Think of The Notebook, it's love. Invictus, we want unity. We want big and we want good things. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we wanting? Because this ultimately is our purpose. This gives us our sense of direction. And if our stories are going to be good, they need to be purpose-driven stories. We all have read Rick Warren's billion-dollar bestseller, Purpose-Driven Life. Why is it so significant? Because people need to have this purpose-driven life. What is it we want? What is our purpose? I'll never forget the feeling of not having a purpose and not having a direction. Friends of ours lent us their camper van. They lived in France and was quite a clapped-out camper van, but amazing opportunity, the best family holiday, to take your kids in a camper van like this. And we didn't know where we were going, but we had Lucy was our Garmin. And every morning we'd wake up and we would punch something into Lucy and we'd say, this is where we want to go. Some address, we'd found a campsite, looked on the map. And usually I would sit in the front with the map on my lap and I would sort of follow where we were going. But the one day I decided I was going to play Monopoly with the kids in the back. And I said, Gary, you can see the map lying on the floor there, actually. I said, I'm just putting the map there. I've punched into Lucy where we've got to go, and you just drive. I'm going to play Monopoly. And he did, as every good husband does. Yes, dear, I will drive. And I think we must have played the marathon Monopoly game. And eventually, after about 2 hours, Gary called me to the front and he said, Deb, can you just come here? I said, you're interrupting. We're in the finale of Monopoly. He said, come here. He said, and then we looked out and he said, does this not look a bit familiar? And I suddenly looked and shock horrors realized we were driving into the village that we had left that morning. And we had gone uphill and down dale in France, the most beautiful, little villages that you drive through. And we had done a complete circle. And, it just reminded me so much of what we do when we don't know what we want in our story, when we don't live a purpose-driven life. We just move in circles. We don't get anywhere. And what a terrible thing when we come to the end of our stories and we feel like we've just driven in a circle. So this idea of purpose is, yes, it feels overplayed and we're all tired of thinking about what purpose is. But if we're going to write, if we're going to live a good story with our life, we need to figure that out for ourselves. And I think they're very definite signposts that God has given us towards this purpose. And I say signposts because if I'd sat in that seat that day and just looked at a few signposts, I would have clearly realized we were going in the wrong direction and going in no direction. But I believe that in three specific, quite simple signposts towards our purpose. And I don't think we're ever too old to relook at this. I think every chapter of our life, we reinvent what our purpose is. We reinvent what our story is going to look like. It's not one thing. It changes all the time. But I think the first is this idea of our strengths, this idea of what God has gifted us with. The second are our passions. And the third, I'm going to say, are the needs that we see around us. And I believe that where these three circles intersect, that's where we find our purpose. That's where we get a sense of direction. That's where God calls us. I would go as far as to say that's where he calls us. So the first is just this idea of realizing our passions. And, you know, it was John Maxwell, the big leadership guru, who said a great leader's courage to fulfill his vision comes from passion, not position. If we're going to lead wherever we are, we've got to have passion about what we're doing. I love talking to Graham, picking on Graham over there, but I love how passionate he is about Focus on the Family and what he does. And sitting the other day with Garth Jafford, who was jumping up his seat talking about story and all that they're doing at Heartlines. It's such a beautiful, contagious energy to be around, because that's why I put that picture of that girl running. Our passion is our energy. You know, sometimes we think we're tired, but actually we're just uninspired. We're just uninspired. And, you know, it was Oprah who said, passion is energy. Feel the power of focusing on something that excites you. It's that idea of loving something so much that you would do it even if you weren't getting paid to do. Wouldn't all of you just do this if you weren't getting paid? But, you know, I think that God has put these passions inside us. And we need to tap into that energy. In the introduction, Carl mentioned what I do with Living Your Strongest Story with Jackie Mole. We have been doing this for about 2 years. And the beautiful thing about it is we are both so passionate. It's called Living Your Strongest Story. We run this course for women, and we do workshops. And it's just, we are passionate about seeing women realize what their strongest story looks like. And then very intentionally working towards living this. So I'm excited to, and feel privileged to say that when I wake up in the morning, I'm excited to work. I'm excited to come here this afternoon because I feel like this is just my sweet spot talking to all of you. It's a beautiful place to be. The second thing that I think, second signpost are our strengths. And I think this is just how God has naturally wired us. It's the way we just naturally think or act or behave. You know what your most natural strengths are. You're amazing at building relationships. You're amazing at working with numbers or creating something or working with words. And you know, I always like to think of it as God's given us all a backpack. And sometimes, and into that backpack, he's put things that are strengths that are very specifically designed for you and where he wants you and your sphere of influence to be. There probably are a lot of pens and typewriters and things like that and movie cameras in this room, but he's put these strengths in each one of you because he knows where he wants you to do. And what we just need to, where he wants you to be, we just need to take the time to take that backpack off and look what's inside. We really promote strengths, the Strengths Finder course, but I mean, there are so many different avenues you can take to find what are my strengths, what am I just naturally gifted at. And when we work in this space of our strengths, it's also a place that's just invigorating and energizing. And I love that verse. All these things, the gifts, the talents, are brought about by one and the same Holy Spirit, distributing to each one individually just as he chooses. And he chooses those things individually because he's individually said, that is what I want you to be doing. So let's take the time to look at what these things are in our life. The third is this idea of identifying needs around you. And I don't think there are a lot of different things around purpose that talk about strengths and passions, but very few of them talk about this. And I think it's probably the most important circle or signpost. Needs around us. And what speaks to me is not necessarily going to speak to you. But this is just really the part where we look up. We look up and we look outwards. And things will naturally just move us, will bring us to tears. Sometimes when we watch the news, there's just a certain part of it that just chokes you or just punches you in the gut. Harvey Firestone said, the growth and development of people is the highest calling of leadership. In other words, it's meeting the needs of those around us, growing those around us, opening our eyes. It's just simply, instead of, just looking down, walking to work on our cell phone, looking down, look up, right wherever we are, whatever office, whatever train, whatever traffic jam, look up, let's see, let's start looking at the needs around us. In South Africa, we are in a country where we have no excuse. We are full of deep and burning needs and broken stories. And it's time for each one of us to tap into God's story for this country. And it begins with us just opening our eyes right where we are. It was Wilberforce who said, all that is needed for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And this is the part where we start to link our purpose with doing, with meeting needs around us that we feel passionate about. And these needs don't have to be very far afield. We don't have to all be missionaries and get on airplanes or boats or whatever. They can be right in front of us, especially in this country. They are right in front of us. And I really believe that this is the place where our stories really start to connect with God's purposes. Friedrich Buchner said, the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness is the passion part, where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. This is the place of our calling. This is the place of our strongest story. This is the place of us living a good story. So these are the signs, just to remind you, the 3 signposts towards our purpose, our strengths, our passions, the needs we see around us. And more than just the center being our purpose, I really believe that this is where your story meets his story. This is where when we find the sweet spot, it's where our stories start to meet with God's great stories and purposes. I love this Rick Warren quote out of his Purpose-Driven Life. You were created to add to life on earth, not just take from it. God wants you to give something back. In God's kingdom, you have a place, a purpose, a role, and a function to fulfill. And this gives your life great significance and value. This gives you an incredible ability to lead right from where you are, because he has planned this purpose. Bono said, when you align yourself with God's purpose, as described in scriptures, something special happens in your life. And I think that this is what lies at the essence of transformational leadership, which your next few days are all about, especially as a Christian. The essence of it now could be wrong, but for me it's, you're the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This is where our stories meet his story. And this really is where our stories become strong, and they gain strength, and they gain momentum, and they become something meaningful to ourselves and meaningful to others. We talked about a good story, we need to know what we want. And this is when I think the things that we want start to coincide with the things that the Lord wants. And it's a beautiful sweet spot, beautiful stream to swim down. So those were the first two, the character who wants something. And the third thing about a good story, which I kind of would like to leave and forget about this part, but unfortunately it's there in the definition of a good story. And this is the idea that a good story involves this character having to overcome some kind of conflict. No good story was ever told or created or written, you all know that, without some sort of resistance. The character has to overcome a certain amount of conflict and hardship to make it a good story. And because it's in this process of overcoming that the character grows and changes into someone that inspires us. Think of Invictus. We look at Mandela, what he overcame, and suddenly we are just so inspired. You look at any good story. When you see what someone overcomes, you start to cheer for them. You think of that feeling in a movie, even if it's like Jason Bourne or something, which Gary loves. He's watched all those things 100 times, but you see what this poor character goes through. But by the end, you are cheering for him because this guy has been through so much that you admire him. You're like, wow, this guy knows how to overcome. And that's when we're inspired. We're inspired to follow people who overcome. And this idea of overcoming conflict, I certainly don't claim to have all the answers here. I certainly look around me and I see stories that have endured so much more than my story even begins to know about or understand. So I feel very unworthy to speak about this even, but as I've looked at the hardest things in my life that I've had to overcome, as I've studied this idea of overcoming conflict, I think there's sort of two things that have risen to the surface, and it's by no means the only thing, but certainly two things that have come up for me that I feel this is how we overcome, how we grow our grit in our stories. And the first, I would say, is that we need to own the shape of our stories. We need to own whatever they look like. The second is that we need to find a new perspective on our pain, find something meaningful that has come to us from the most painful parts of our story. And this is, when you look at leadership things, you read so much about a leader needing to be resilient, a leader needing to be able to rise up again and have the courage to try again, to just show up, to be vulnerable. All of these things sort of, I've tried to think they maybe come under these two umbrellas. It was Brené Brown, and I love her work, and she's done an amazing book. I think it's one of her latest, called Dare to Lead. I think that's what it's called. But in that, she says, inspired leadership requires vulnerability. Do we have the courage to show up, be seen, take risks, ask for help, own our mistakes, learn from failure, and can we support the people around us doing the same? And I think that's what this idea of owning and embracing the shape of our story is, and about finding something meaningful in our pain. The title for your few days is Transformational Leadership, and I think it says for all seasons. I saw that in what Felicity sent me, and I thought, this is about building leaders who, lights off, that feels beautiful. This is about building leaders who are able to have the resilience through every single season, through the hill, up over the hills, down through the valleys. And, you know, when we look at the shape of our story, every single story has a shape. And ours does too. And when we run our courses, we actually get the ladies to plot the shape of their stories. And, you know, it's so easy for us, especially as leaders, to own all those high mountaintop moments, all the glorious things that we've done and achieved. But it's not so easy for us to show up and be seen and to own those valleys of the times we've failed, the relationships we've messed up, the addictions we've had, the abuse we've suffered. And you know what? That good leadership requires that. It requires a bit of vulnerability. To connect with other people, we've got to own those valleys too. I think authenticity is probably one of the most important things in leadership. And I think it was Marcus Buckingham who said, authenticity is your most precious commodity as a leader. And learning to own those valleys requires a whole lot of authenticity. And to show up in front of your colleagues or your team and just be authentically you. I think one of the bravest women that I haven't met her, but certainly know her story, is Bethany Hamilton. And I don't know how many of you are surfers or have kids who love surfing, but Bethany Hamilton was she was a professional surfer. And then she had the unfortunate accident of being bitten by a shark, and her one arm was taken off by a shark. And it's the most amazing, it's a beautiful movie if you haven't seen it, but of one brave woman who learned to own her story and rise up past the deepest and darkest valleys of her story. And the amazing thing was when Bethany got married, and the sort of surfing world waited in anticipation for the first few pictures that she would release on social media of her wedding. And this is what she put up. And I thought, wow, you know, she is the most beautiful girl. She could so easily have just turned her other shoulder and shown this perfectly beautiful arm with her blonde hair and her wedding dress. But she chose to show the ugliest part of her, the scar, this knob on her arm. And she did it again when she had her first child, and then when she had her second. And she's saying, this is who I am. And this is the shape of me and my story. And you know what? I'm stronger because of it. And I think the incredible thing that I've learned from stories like this is I've learned that when I have the courage to accept the most painful and ugly parts of my story, I start to see how they've actually shaped me. And not only how they've shaped me, but how they've actually empowered me and strengthened my story as I've moved forward. So that's the first thing, owning the shape of our story, whatever it looks like. The second is this idea of finding a new perspective on our pain. And she needs no introduction, but another really brave woman. And she also happens to obviously be in leadership. And this is Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook. And Sheryl wrote, obviously she wrote Lean In, which was her big leadership guru woman book, which was a huge bestseller. But for me, I kind of bypassed Lean In because she wrote a second book. A few years ago, her husband very unexpectedly died, and Sheryl's at the peak of her career and just trailblazing in Facebook and in the world of women and leadership. And when her husband died, it literally just pulled the carpet from underneath her feet. It was, she really collapsed for a while. And then she wrote this book called Option B. My copy is so dirty because I've read it and reread it. But it is such a highly recommended read, Option B. And this is really a story about, it's a story about facing adversity. And it's a story about building resilience as a human being, as a leader. And it's also a story about finding joy again. I love the cover, that idea of this red balloon carrying this heavy brick, this idea that joy can be rediscovered. And, she says, when life pulls you under, you can kick back against the bottom, break the surface, and breathe again. And more than this, I think what this book teaches you is that more than just breathing again, she talks about how we can grow from adversity. And psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. So it's not just this idea of when we have adversity in our life and in our stories, we bounce back from it. It's actually this idea that we actually can bounce forward and do something meaningful with our pain. I think one of the most beautiful examples that came to mind for me around this was our own country. With our terrible history of apartheid, this country is just so filled with so many sad and painful stories. But incredible leaders like Mandela, like Desmond Tutu, have taught us that we can find ways to overcome the pain of our past and even actually bounce forward. And Desmond Tutu, who you all know was put in charge of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was really to bring healing in our nation and the atrocities of apartheid. And when he was asked, what kind of people do you want to use? He said, I want to use victims. And he said, but one thing, I want to use victims whose lives have been torn apart, ravaged. But one thing, he said, they cannot have stayed victims. If they serve on the commission, they must be people who have forgiven their oppressors. These people, he said, will be the wounded healers of South Africa. And so the TRC was born. And it's a beautiful just metaphor of finding something meaningful in our pain. And, as we, first of all, acknowledge the shape of our stories, and it's such a great exercise to try and do that and see where the mountaintops are and where the valleys are. But then to force yourself to say, look at this hardest, most painful moment. And as I did it myself, there were, things came to mind of terrible car accident I had and a bad relationship and miscarriage or whatever struggles that you've gone through. And then I thought, what has come out of these things? What learning has come out? And as we start to do that, we start to actually be able to almost flip this graph. And I'm not saying that valley now for me has become a mountaintop moment. A negative is always a negative. But I'm able to find a mountaintop learning. I'm able to find something there that was so valuable to me. If I think of some of the hardest times in my life, the most beautiful realization is that God was always there. He never left me. And it was sometimes in those hardest of moments that I've met him in the most intimate way. And in those moments, he showed me something beautiful about maybe myself or my story and equipped me with some sort of strength to move forward. And ironically, actually, sometimes out of these most painful valleys come amazing realizations of what we want to do of our calling in our life. It's often birthed in these moments. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, which I've been quite taken with, and it's basically the idea that they take broken ceramics, and unlike most of us who repair ceramics with super glue, I have a lot of broken stuff in my house because I have a lot of balls flying through. In fact, we had a window on the weekend. But if it's a ceramic, I will take super glue and I'll try and glue it together, and so you can't see the cracks. But what kintsugi does is it's a Japanese art form, and they mix the glue or the lacquer with actual gold. And they repair the cracks so that you can see these cracks. And what they're saying is we're going to recognize the history of this object. And we're going to say that the value of this object lies in its cracks. So that's wherein the gold lies in the cracks. And it's a beautiful metaphor for our life. And as Christians, it's an amazing thing to know that the Lord has taken the cracks of our story and made them into something beautiful and valuable even. So no matter what the past chapters of our story have been, they don't need to define the future chapters. So really that's where I hope you've been able to stay with me with this massive metaphor, but this idea that that's what a good story is made of. A character who wants something and who overcomes a whole lot of conflict and hardship to get it. And right in the beginning, I said, you remember that feeling that we get when we watch a great movie. When the credits roll at the end, we have this deep sense of gratitude because we've been moved in some way. We've been forced to think about our own lives. And the same thing we want when the credits roll at the end of our lives and even during our lives, as people witness our lives every single day, especially if we're in positions of leadership, but wherever we are, people are watching us, especially as Christians, but that they can feel a sense of gratitude that they're getting to witness our life. And it's prompting them and moving them to think about their own life. So I want to just end with probably one of my favorite little vignettes or stories, which I hope epitomizes where I've tried to take you today. So take a look at this.
เขาจะได้อะไร ถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวัน เขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลย ไม่ได้รวยขึ้น ไม่ได้ออกทีวี ไม่มีใครรู้จัก ไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้น เพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุด
For me, that's inspirational leadership at its best and at its simplest. The beautiful thing is that he doesn't go anywhere. He just is right where he is, on his way to work every day. I don't know if you saw the writing. It said, what does he get? Does he get money? Does he get fame? No, but he gets to see a world made more beautiful. And we see this incredible ripple effect of how he changes others in the process. I love that quote that says, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader, no matter where you are. And this is what strong stories are about. I think we get to lead right from where we are, from when we're shopping at Pick n Pay, the Pick n Pay teller, to each person we come into contact with every single day. And in this space, when we lead like this, I think we're teaching the world that it's not just about us. It's not just about our story, but it's about God, and it's about his message of love to a broken world. And I really believe God needs our stories to bring him glory, and to be used for his purposes, and to extend his kingdom, and to be the light in the dark world. And when we connect our very small stories to God's stories, I think this is when they become great. This is when they become his story. And his story is history. And what is history? I mean, history is about leaving a mark on one life or many lives. It's about seeing the world made more beautiful because of our stories. And I think sometimes the biggest way we fail God is that the God who created us is that we make small what he really intended to make large with our stories. And he strategically placed each one of you exactly where you are to lead. And he will use the inspiration and the strength of your story to do it. And I think, of course, when we talk about all these things, we say, well, it's so much easier said than done. But I think the amazing thing about doing and writing our story with Jesus Christ is that we get to be led to. And to one last story, but you all know it, the King and I, Anna and the King. It's a beautiful movie they made, and there's a point in this movie where there's a banquet at the end, and the king comes up to Anna and he says, will you dance? And she sort of says, no, what say I fall on my face? And he just puts out his hand and he says, I am the king and I will lead. And that's what we have. Isn't that an amazing thing? As we lead others, we have the king to lead us. And it's not by might, nor by power, but by my strength and my spirit. And I just want to end by reading you just 2 quick paragraphs that I wrote right at the end of my book, just really sum up where I hope I've taken you today in the journey that we've been on. We live in a world where there are a lot of bad and sad stories told. Stories that tell us that life is meaningless and that humanity has no real purpose. I don't believe this. I believe that God intends for each one of us to live a more purposeful story, and he offers to guide us towards the much greater adventure of his story. And how wonderful it is when we make the choice to live a better story, and how glorious a better story shines. A great story is made up of many smaller ones. Some are about home and happiness and love, and the pages sing with exciting journeys and colorful characters. Yet alongside these, there will always be stories that are harder to read. These are the ones that talk of loneliness, they tell of tragedies, and they paint portraits of pain. But a story would not be complete without all of its chapters. In the end, it's these parts that make it whole, and they're all woven together by common threads. There's risk, there's resistance, there's often sacrifice, and there's always fear. But if we choose not to be overcome by any particular part of our story, and to keep writing even when the risk or the sacrifice are overwhelming or the fear consuming, we may just realize our part in God's story. And this is when our seemingly small stories will give breath to great stories, which in turn give life to greater stories. And that is really my prayer for all of you today. Thank you for having me.